Our next speaker is Alizé Carrère. She is a National Geographic Explorer. She is an award-winning filmmaker, and she's also a doctoral student researching and documenting human adaptations to environmental change. So back in 2013, she received support from the National Geographic to conduct research in Madagascar, where she spent several months looking at an agricultural adaptation in response to severe deforestation. Since then, she's received more grants from other organizations like the Redford Center and PBS, and her work has evolved into a broader film and educational project on human resilience in the face of climate change. There's also a really great series you can find on National Geographic Education called Modern Explorer. We're going to do an event with classrooms sharing that this month, a little bit later. So Alizé, it's so great to have you joining us live from Florida today.
Hi, thank you, Joe. It's so good to be here.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm going to let you jump right in.
Great.
And then I bet we're going to have some questions from the crew tuning in live.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you all today. I know I often, when I give presentations, share a lot about my work, but I thought this would actually be a really great opportunity to, mention and talk a little bit about what I do in terms of looking at human adaptation to environmental change, but also talk about the process and my experiences and how I've got to where I am today, because I think that a lot of the questions that I get are about my journey, and I think hopefully through my experiences I can give some advice or some insights into what might have made the process easier or better. Not to say that there were any regrets, but it's been a circuitous path to becoming both a filmmaker and also now doing my PhD, which is a continuation of the work that I did right after college. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, is that good?
We're good, yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, as Joe mentioned, I'm a National Geographic Explorer, which is, as there are many of us on this wonderful event this weekend. That's another word for being a grantee for the National Geographic Society and getting support through them, which has been really foundational for my work. And then more recently, I've gotten into filmmaking as a medium to share some of my stories, which I've become super passionate about. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. And in addition to that, I am continuing my research at the University of Miami as a PhD student in the Alizé Center for Ecosystem Science and Policy. So I am trying to bring some of the research that I've been doing for filmmaking and documenting the stories of the front lines of climate change into a more formalized PhD program right now, which has been really incredible. But before I get into that, I just want to give a bit of a personal background. I'm beaming to you all from Miami, Florida, which is where I'm based doing my PhD, but I'm actually originally from Ithaca, New York, in upstate. And I grew up in a very wonderful, unusual, there's all kinds of words to describe our home, house. And you can see from these images that our house has a 300-year-old oak tree growing, or basically a large tree growing through the front porch of it. And my parents built this home. The house was originally a fishing shack that had a dirt floor and an outhouse. And my parents were sailing out in the world and decided they wanted to settle down when my mom was pregnant with my older sister. And so they bought this house and decided to expand it and turn it into a proper home. And my parents' vision for this was not to cut down the tree, but rather build the house around the tree such that it became a part of our home. And so that tree really was a very big part of our life. I know that sounds funny to say, but it was kind of this living, breathing organism. In addition to, as a part of our home, we would always have to carve away more of our front porch every few years as it was growing. There were just all kinds of different aspects of this home that made it a really unique place to grow up and really understand the dynamism of the world and of the natural environment around us. That is a photo of my dad taking my sister and I to school one morning. You can see where we had this large suspension bridge coming down over a gorge that reaches down to our house. So we were really kind of tucked in the canopy here, very much like Swiss Family Robinson or Berenstain Bears, as we used to, kind of joke about when we were kids. And it really gave me an appreciation for the natural world and how humans coexist within a very dynamic world around them. And that, in no small part, has contributed to what it is that I study today, which is how people around the world adapt to various profound landscape changes happening to them and to their homes. This is a photo that my mom and I were going through my childhood art box and found just the number of drawings that my sister and I made of tree houses, thinking that that was, of course, just how everybody lived. And we were pulling these out, just laughing about how the line between sort of the human environment and nature was very blurry for us. And I think it made, of course, our upbringing very whimsical. And it's just kind of a fun illustration, like I said, of just the spirit that kind of occupied our living space growing up. I went to a large public high school, Ithaca High School in my hometown, and it was there that I developed a passion for environmental science. And this for me was absolutely transformative for the direction that I ended up taking for both college, but then after that. I was not necessarily always the strongest science student. I had a real appreciation for it, but I had a hard time connecting science to my day-to-day life. And I felt like it was something that was relegated to, labs and behind microscopes. And I lacked the understanding of how science really was a part of everything that we did and why this mattered so much to us. And so until I took AP Environmental Science in high school, my junior year, that really changed how I saw science and its role for all of us, and how science and society are these sort of deeply intertwined forces, and how and constantly exchanging with one another. So that course, AP Environmental Science, or otherwise APES as we called it, really set me on my path to study environmental science in my undergrad, which I know now there's a huge number of environmental science majors. I think they are wonderful opportunities for students to get interdisciplinary research experience. If you're not entirely certain, you know what you want to do. I had an incredible experience at McGill University, where I did my degree in environmental science, and it was really at the beginning here, started in this high school classroom in my hometown. It didn't hurt that we had this beautiful waterfall just outside the back of our high school. Ithaca, the town that I grew up in, is called, the slogan is Ithaca's Gorges. We have lots of beautiful waterfalls and gorges. And this is what our teachers utilized as a resource. They brought us out into the backyard here across the street. We collected crayfish. We did all kinds of natural sampling and, activities out there. Even in our literature class, we went out there to write poetry. And that, again, kind of brought science and the natural world together for me, and society together for me, in a way that allowed me to see it as a whole, complete picture. As I mentioned, I went to McGill University up in Montreal in Canada for my both my undergraduate degree, which I did in environmental studies, and then I stayed and did a Master's of Science in Integrated Water Resource Management. And McGill was an incredible university. I had such an amazing time there. I ended up staying because I enjoyed it so much. But what I want to say about both of these degrees, and this is again something that I like to share about my journey, is that we're both hyper interdisciplinary. And what I mean by that is that they really brought in fields and methods from many different fields of inquiry and study. And that for me has been hugely valuable in my career. And so I know we're moving into a space where interdisciplinary research is really valued, and potentially in some cases more so than very siloed research. And so for me, that has allowed me to get a more holistic view of the research that I've done over the last few years, but also allowed me to, I feel very relevant, I guess is maybe the word to use, to a lot of different places in our society. And I want young people to feel that sense of relevancy and connection to the planet and to our economies and to everything that is a part of this day-to-day life that we're living out in real time. So I just say that because I know that environmental studies, it might not be a very specific, our parents want you to, why don't you study biology or chemistry? But there is a real value to environmental studies today, even among employers looking for people who have a diverse set of skills and can apply those skills in a range of environments. When I was at McGill, I attended a National Geographic Young Explorer grant workshop, and that was in 2012, actually. And that program it still exists. It's now called the National Geographic Early Career Grant. At the time, it was the Young Explorer Grant. And this was a grant program that provided opportunities for people to study, young people to do a field expedition who might not have had a whole career behind them of experience out in the field or, running expeditions. And this grant for me was really transformational because it, like I said, kind of set me on this path of doing field work and studying, out in the world how people are living with change in different places. And so this started in Madagascar, where I got a grant to look at not these wonderful lemurs, even though these are, of course, the very charismatic creatures that we associate with the island of Madagascar, but rather deforestation, or sort of the lack of trees that were, the problems and consequences that deforestation was creating for farmers across the country. So I went to Madagascar thanks to this National Geographic grant that I applied for, to study how farmers were adapting to deforestation. And this is a photo that I took of some of my research there that documents just the incredible burning and which is called tavi, a slash and burn agriculture, that was occurring across the highlands. But my research questions were focused specifically on this formation called a lavaca, which is a massive erosional gully that forms in these hillsides. And that, as a result, partially of deforestation and the consequences of having very loose, vulnerable soil, but also, there's lots of different factors at play here. And I don't have time to go into it all for this presentation, but I have some information on my website if you'd like to learn more, which I'll provide at the end. But basically, what I want to highlight here from this research expedition, which then guided a lot of my subsequent field experiences, was that I was doing a type of research that was very human-centered and talking to people and farmers and trying to understand how they were coping with severe landscape change. And this, for me, was my first foray into the social sciences specifically, and using anthropological field methods like ethnography, which is talking to different people in communities to understand what the challenges are that they're facing and how they're coping, and structured and semi-structured interviews and participant observation. These were all skills that I learned while I was in Madagascar, interviewing farmers about these formations and how they were adapting their practices. And what was amazing about this adventure was that we learned farmers were utilizing these erosional formations, which up until then had really been considered a very negative socioeconomic, ecological consequence of deforestation. They were actually using them for growing food, because they kind of became these pockets on the land over time where nutrient-rich topsoils and water and so forth would get trapped. And so on this landscape, there would be much more, the crops would be growing better and faster and stronger inside these protected kind of depressions that you would see across the hills. And some of them even turned into these really extensive field. You can see this farmer here did terrace agriculture all the way up the top. So my research question was, well, how are farmers adapting their practices to live with these profound changes taking place? And that really kickstarted this broader research project about what does adaptation look like on the ground as we cope with the effects of climate change. And as I said, very much, this is a very qualitative type of research. It's talking with people. And again, that for me was always the pull for science for me, was finding the human element and finding the human aspect that I could personally connect to. And that I think for all of us allows us to really engage with these issues at a deeper level. So I have since created a series called Adaptation. This was how I got into the filmmaking aspect of my work, where, going to these different places around the world, looking at how people are adapting to environmental change, documenting and researching those stories, and then turning that into something that could be utilized in classrooms for educators, for students, for lifelong learners, was for me a really important part of this process. Not only just because I think these are powerful stories to tell, but also because I wanted to know how these techniques could be shared and replicated and scaled for the rest of the world to learn from, as we all collectively try and cope with environmental change and climate change and the climate crisis on a much broader scale. So I can't share too many more details about this right now because it will be coming out sometime later this year. I will be sharing on my social media, on my Instagram and my Facebook and Twitter and so forth. But it is a 4-part series that we filmed in Bangladesh, Vanuatu, Ladakh, which is in northern India, and here in the United States, about different ways communities are adapting to environmental changes. And so it's really kind of these are stories that blend science and culture and society together, where we ask and understand the local perspectives of what's taking place in these otherwise really difficult realities and conversations to have about human land use and human, our extraction of natural resources and the consequences of fossil fuel combustion and what that does to our different very fragile ecosystems around the world. I'm not going to go into the episodes. These are just some slides about the episodes themselves. I have much more information on this on my website, so I will encourage you to check that out. The carp, this is a story, the episode in Kentucky is about Asian carp and the invasive, how invasive they are, but really what one woman is doing to transform them into a solution, in that she's created a fish processing plant. In America, we tend to consider carp as a trash fish. And the protagonist of this episode of the series is a Chinese-American woman named Angie Yu, who moved to a very small town in western Kentucky on the Ohio River to start the first large-scale carp processing facility to export our carp to places that do consume it around the world, because carp in many other places is regularly consumed as a really important, nutritious, and delicious fish. Whether that's in parts of Asia or in Eastern Europe or in the Middle East. There's lots of different areas where carp is regularly consumed. And because today is the Chinese New Year, I can't help but bring this into this conversation. The carp, which is the sort of main character of this story, other than Angie, of course, is really a very powerful symbol in Chinese culture and represents fertility and abundance and prosperity. And this is a part of our story in this episode about how could a fish on one side of the world be regarded as trash and something that we want to exterminate, whereas on the other side of the world it's cherished as a valuable food product, but also as a creature that represents perseverance and abundance, based on the fact that it is, of course, so prolific. It's such a prolific breeder. This story for me, again, and it always comes back to this in my research, is how these human and cultural dimensions enter science, and how that ties to what we study and bringing the human dimension of climate change to the forefront, so that people can be motivated by some of these stories to be active and engaged in finding solutions for some of them. This is a meal that we, actually I didn't, but one of Angie's wonderful colleagues prepared an entirely carp-based meal. This came right out of our Mississippi River waters, where there's carp pot stickers, carp hot dogs, carp burgers. That is a very typical dish there of the big carp in the middle that you're seeing that's prepared in China, carp stew. And they were really showcasing the many ways we can utilize carp in the United States. And Angie's main goal is to really try and, as she says, reduce, reuse, and redefine carp as an incredible resource. So I'm getting short on time, so I want to leave time for questions, because as much as these stories are fun, I really would love to be of use to all of you. And if there are any questions about this journey and what being a social scientist is like, particularly at this intersection of society and culture and science, I would be more than happy to share my experiences. This is coming soon. Please tune in to some of my social media channels for further information about when and where that will be coming out. It was supported by, as Joe said at the beginning, several grants from National Geographic, as well as the Redford Center, and most recently the Pacific Islanders in Communications, which is a PBS affiliated group. I'll just end on this quote that is truly one of my favorite quotes, and it feels like it's relevant to so many different parts of life in general. And I came across this in a magazine once upon a time when I was flying somewhere, in like the American Airlines magazine that was in front of my seat. And it's a quote by Charles Darwin that says, "It is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." And for me, this quote really captures the essence of what adaptation is about and how we live with profound change taking place around us. It's not necessarily about being the brightest or the strongest or the smartest. It's how good are you at rolling with change and moving with change as it comes your way. And that in so many ways is the key to success and finding a place, being, living with mobility and impermanence. And sometimes I think we forget that when we talk about issues of climate change and wanting to just, build seawalls and raise homes, and where are the places that we look in the world where we see people doing it differently and how they are embracing change or embracing as difficult and challenging and kind of uncomfortable as that may be. Where can we find those points of inspiration? And so that for me is the goal of the Adaptation series, and I hope that you all get a chance to look at it when it is out and about. I'll just end by saying that I'm now doing my PhD in ecosystem science and policy at the University of Miami. I continue to research climate change adaptation, specifically the human, again, always the human dimension of it. Social science, the social sciences for me have been just an incredible way to build a career as a scientist, but working really at that, like I said, that intersection. And as my PhD advisor, Dr. Kenny Broad always says, we joke that, there's often this bifurcation between like the hard sciences and the social sciences. And he said, it's more like the hard sciences and the harder sciences. We in the social sciences, we are dealing with human behavior and decisions, and we don't have clean rules to define exactly how things are going to occur. A plus B equals C. It's a much, much more complicated, nuanced environment. And yet that for me is really the beauty of the humanities and how we integrate science with humans and our different social and cultural lives. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I love talking to the next generation, particularly of young women who are interested in this. And you can find more information about my work on my website and on my social media at Alizé Carrère for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
All right, Alizé, thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Lots of comments in the chat about looking forward to seeing Adaptation. I think there's a couple educators tuning in, looking forward to sharing it with their classrooms. So that's great.
Yes, that's exactly what we made them for. They're short 12 to 15-minute pieces, and we will hopefully have some curriculum as well to go along with it for educators.
All right, perfect. Well, I will just suggest that they check out Modern Explorer as well. So
yes.
if you go to YouTube and search Modern Explorer and Nat Geo Education, that series is up there. Why don't you, the 1-minute synopsis of that series?
So Modern Explorer is a 9-episode educational series that we created with National Geographic Education and Lindblad Expeditions, and which is they run all of the ship-going experiences for National Geographic Expeditions. It is a series that looks at what does exploration mean today and how has that changed from the era of people like Ernest Shackleton and Charles Darwin. And we tell that through myself as one of the hosts and my friend Tom Ritchie, who's a naturalist at Lindblad Expeditions aboard the cruises, and he and I traipse through South Georgia and the Falkland Islands looking at wildlife and the stories of past explorers. And it's kind of a passing of the baton where, Tom is now looking toward my generation. I'm a young woman in this field in the 21st century, and how is that different? And the world feels mapped and trodden today. What does that mean for kids that do want to be explorers themselves? So please do check it out. It's a fun tool for classrooms as well. We look at also animal biology, there's an episode on seals, on penguins, on albatross. So you'll find a lot on there. And it was produced by Alex Wenchel, one of our, good friend of mine who did an extraordinary job bringing it all together.
All right. And I will also add that if you check exploringbythesea.com, you can find the event coming up with Alizé, and your students can meet her as well. So lots of good stuff coming up soon. Okay, let's grab a couple questions from here. So, you did mention at the end that you're working on your PhD right now. And Caitlin is tuning in and wondering, you had your master's. What made you decide to go further and go after your PhD?
That's such a good question. I described the PhD for me was always an option. It was something that it was like a bee in my bonnet kind of thing. It was just always there. I felt like I wanted to do it. I wasn't sure if I would be able to just put my life on hold to go back and do it because I was working on these films at the time. And what ended up happening was that it never left me, this like feeling of, okay, you should do a PhD. And so I thought, okay, I got to pay attention to this, to this little voice in my head. And it really was an incredible opportunity for me to deepen some of my work that I was doing on community adaptation to climate change. So and this is my advice for anybody who is interested in a PhD or is looking for PhDs, you have to find a program that really meets your interests and your lifestyle. And there are lots of different PhD programs out there, but the Alizé Center at the University of Miami it's again an interdisciplinary program. My whole academic career has been interdisciplinary research, academic degrees and programs. And it allowed me to continue doing a lot of the work and make the PhD kind of fit what I was doing. So it became a kind of a no-brainer at that point. And the director of the program, Dr. Kenny Broad, who's the National Geographic Explorer, he's also my PhD advisor. We had a lot of conversations about what I would study. And it just felt like a really good fit. And I just love research, and being in the pursuit of knowledge and being able to do a deep dive for me has been how I've explored the world, truly. And I wanted to keep up with that.
All right. Let's grab another question here from the chat. Okay, there we go. So, you've been able to do a lot of travel, looking at how resilient we are, and how we're adapting to changes that are happening around us. We talked a little bit about what you saw in Madagascar. Can you talk about another adaptation that really was exciting to see?
Yeah, I'm going to use the example, which is actually one of the episodes of the series. I'll just give you a little teaser, maybe. I traveled to Ladakh, which is up in northern India, and this was in 2016, I believe. Now, it was several years ago. And the story that we went to document there was about how glaciers are melting more sporadically and kind of at different, more unpredictable glacial melt happening in this mountainous region, which is actually an arid high mountain desert. And so fresh water is a very precious resource, and trying to get glacial meltwater that's how they irrigate, that's how they feed their bring water to their livestock. And so the adaptation we went to look at was how a gentleman by the name of Sonam Wangchuk is capturing glacial meltwater in the winter months and redirecting it and storing it in these giant ice pyramids called ice stupas. That are being utilized for kind of a capture and storing. Now, one thing I will mention about these adaptations, this is a key distinction for me personally, is adaptation is one piece of the climate change puzzle. That does not mean we can let off the gas on mitigation, which is really getting at the source of a lot of the carbon emissions that that a lot of Western nations are continuing to spew out, that is causing a lot of these nations to have to adapt. So while adaptation is absolutely a part of the portfolio of solutions and answers, it is not the only one. And I want to make it very clear that there are some places that will have to adapt, but there are plenty of other places, including places like the United States, where we can really do better in terms of how we are emitting and polluting so that those adaptations don't have to be so severe for other places in the world. And even here at home, I live in Miami and we have sea level rise right on my doorstep. So.
Oh, it's the first time the mic got me today. I wondered if I'd get through the whole day without getting caught with the mic, but we know the answer to that now. It got me. Okay. So we have some students who are tuning in. And, one's commenting on that fish feast and how it looked pretty good. But then another, Berkeley, is wondering about traveling for work. Are you able to travel right now, or have you been staying pretty local?
No, I have stayed very, very local. I have not done any travel. I was actually, so just to mention the carp story and our main character, Angie, who I mentioned, we have plans to potentially expand that into a feature documentary. And the plan was in February of 2020, last year, we were supposed to go to China for a recon trip to figure out what we were going to do. Now, of course, that was when the coronavirus was starting to become recognized in Wuhan. So that got put on hold. And so since then, it's been a great opportunity to focus on my PhD and do a lot of reading and writing. We entered post-production for the Adaptation series. We filmed everything prior to the pandemic. So it was actually oddly okay timing with my series, because we had done everything already. It was just working in the edit and doing post. And so I have not traveled. I don't have any intentions to travel for 2021 either. If and when the world is in a better place, I will look to travel in 2022 for my dissertation, my actual PhD research.
All right. Good stuff. Sounds like a very responsible decision. Alizé, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to host you. I've had the pleasure of hosting you with classrooms for years now. So it's great to have you join this festival. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in a week or so and talking a little Modern Explorer.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks, Joe. You were one of the first people to bring me into your own classroom back when you were teaching. It was so fun up in Ontario.
All right. I appreciate you making the trip across the border. That was great.
Of course. All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Have a good rest of the day.
You too.